the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to show 10 of Grey Hat Beard. We're coming back to you with our Modern Workplace podcast. I am the Grey of Grey Hat Beard. My name's Kevin McDonnell. I'm a solutions architect at CPS.
I'm the Hat. My name's Al. I'm also a solution architect at CPS.
I'm Beard. My name is Gary Trinder. I'm also a solutions architect at CPS, Microsoft Office Development MVP and member of the PMP team as well.
And if you're new to the podcast, as I mentioned, we're a modern workplace podcast. We all work in the Microsoft 365 space. So what we talk about every couple of weeks, we go on the latest news and what's been happening and what's kind of front of mind for us. Then we pick a topic to talk about. And this week's topic is book club. So we're each going to be picking two books, maybe slightly stretching to three in some cases. And it's vaguely related to the modern workplace and things that have inspired us and kept us intrigued. So hopefully you can have a read or a listen. I know we're big fans of Audible, and we'll talk about those in the second half. But in this first half, we pick a load of links and news that we've seen out there, but we're going to take a slightly different tack this week because there's been two big events. So we've had the Microsoft Business Application Summit, or MBAS. So Al has been keenly looking at that and is going to tell us a bit about it. And also Github Satellite. So with Microsoft's purchase of GitHub, a lot of big news coming for that. And Gary's been listening to a lot of the keynote and the sessions that came out from there. So I was going to talk a bit about that. I've just been working while these guys have been sitting around just listening to things. So I haven't, and we've been trying to record this for a little while. I haven't listened to too much of the updates on this. So I'm going to be an innocent bystander asking those awkward, stupid questions, hopefully, as we go through. I'm going to kick off with, well, there's one bit of news, and we didn't talk about this in our kind of quick preamble as we organise what we're going to do. But I think, Al, although your hat, you may have a bit of news you want to share that you've been keeping under your hats for those on the video.
Well, people don't usually see under the hat on the video, do they? But for those who haven't seen, I have no hair. So yeah, still gonna keep it under the hat. But yes, after almost 20 years of having long hair, it's gone. So I fully expect to be completely anonymous at every in-person event that starts once they start up again. Which will be quite amusing.
Absolutely. So that those who've heard Al speak or seen him speak will know there was long, luscious locks. I think you're planning to do something with the
yes, it is being donated to charity. So it is going to be donated to charity that makes wigs for kids with cancer. So it is going to a good cause,
which I think is fantastic as well. So quick clap for Al there. Sorry, Gary, go.
No, I was just saying, if you're at a conference now, you can just hide. You can take your hat off and walk around, and people won't be able to find you.
Exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. Nobody would recognise me. It'd be quite amusing.
The other one in terms of time, I've also like to take a big thank you to David Warner. Fading in the background, but I have my PMP Parker the Porcupine top on, so we'll put some link to Parker's Place that David Warner II has put together, a fantastic site where you can buy all sorts of PMP related materials. But more importantly, all the proceeds go to charity, and I think it's code.org is the name of the charity that helps get people learning how to code the world round. I run a cub pack, and I've used some of the code.org stuff to help try and teach some of the kids there to code. So a really worthwhile cause.
Yeah, it's great. There's something for everyone on that marketplace. You can get anything kind of PMP related, CLI, PowerShell if you want. Parker, go crazy. I think there's some interesting leggings that you can buy as well, which is a bit crazy. But hey, some people might want to wear Parker going for a run.
Any hats? Any hats available?
You know what?
Yeah, there are some caps, I think, aren't there? I think
maybe that'll be one for a future show then.
That's a good idea, actually. Yeah. If anyone wants to buy Al hat, send it around CPS. I'm sure it'll get to him eventually. So we're going to news. I mentioned we're going to talk about Al's going to go and talk about the Business Application Summit. But we mentioned in the last episode that we entered the hackathon. So we were pretty tired on the recording on there. And unfortunately, Al missed the recording on that one. But the exciting news is our team actually got nominated as the finalist. So we were put forward as the finalist in EMEA, so Europe, Middle East and Africa, out of, I think it's about 50 odd teams, wasn't it, Al?
I think there were about 30 teams in EMEA,
30.
and 2 were nominated to go through to the global final, which I think was pretty good going for us.
Yeah, very, very happy. And I should remember, I think it was Team GTD that won overall in the end. So sort of quick clap to them, a great and very worthy winners. So we'll share some links to the videos and the show notes for that one. Great experience. I think I mentioned last time, hackathons are great way to learn, great way to work together and learn from other people. But really, that was a precursor to the Business Application Summit. So, Al, interesting news came out of that.
So this is a new conference for me. I've not really attended this one before. It was one that was due to be held in Dallas this year. Obviously, it went online, which I think from the Twitter feeds that I was following, there were a lot of people that it was quite new for. And so for those of you who aren't aware, Business Application Summit is essentially the conference for Power Platform and Dynamics. And so it is all of the business applications elements that Microsoft do. So with the growth of the Power Platform, there were a lot more people who were attending this than I think they've ever had before. It's where they make all the key announcements. So it was awaited eagerly because Wave 1 for Dynamics was due to be updated April. They kind of put that on hold a little bit. So there was a lot of anticipation about what was going to be announced during MBAS this year. I guess the first thing to point out is that, it was online, and we've had a lot of different conferences going on online. And I think the format for this one was really good. The way they did it, they had the first sort of 4.5, 5 hours of announcement sessions, and then they had Ask the Experts after that. And the announcement sessions were half an hour long, which if you've met some of the people who were speaking, you'd know that they can probably speak fast enough to get everything into half an hour. But there were a lot of people who were actually speeding up quite a lot just to get stuff through in half an hour and do demos as well. So it was really interesting to see the response for that. But then they had 15-minute slots between each session, and they had John Levesque and Don Osaka hosting essentially a TV show between each of the sessions. And what they did, which was really nice actually, was they highlighted a key point from each of the 6 sessions that had gone on in the previous slot, and just kind of discussed it a little bit. And then they talked about, what else was going on in the world. So they had a Twitter wall of, feedback from people. So it was really engaging. They engaged. I mean, if you're not familiar with John and Donna, they both have tons of energy. So you were always going to get that sort of really high energy presentation, but they engaged really, really well with all of the online community who were participating and actually, consuming the information, which was really, really good.
And I think I caught a little bit because they announced the hackathon overall global winners on that. So I caught a little bit. But what was really interesting was that they were kind of doing wrapping up and highlights of each of the sessions previously, weren't they? So if you missed bits of it, it was a great way to kind of get an overview.
Yeah, and you've got to remember it's really broad. Business apps in Microsoft, because it covers Power Platform and Dynamics. There were sessions just on Dynamics. There were sessions on sort of app source and solution building, and then there were sessions on the Power Platform as well. So it was really quite a broad subject area, and so therefore there was a lot that you could only attend 1 out of 6 sessions in each slot. So it was really nice to be able to see actually those are some sessions that I need to actually watch later, and because they're only half an hour long.
And they're all available to anyone on demand, aren't they? So you can go back.
They are all available on demand. So yeah, really, it was a really good session, and there was a lot of really interesting stuff coming out of it. So I guess some of the stuff had been, discussed a little bit previously at Ignite, and some of it was coming to fruition now. So I guess that some of the key things, the consolidation of the Power Platform Admin Center and having more data at your fingertips in terms of things like monitoring the capacity, the performance, being able to analyze the performance of Power Apps in particular, more integration with Azure App Insights to be able to actually manage that platform in more detail. I think is going to be a key thing to make it easier for developers and for platform administrators to actually understand where there may be challenges in terms of things like performance.
So App Insights will be there within your Power Apps, and you've got a central portal to see all of that together. Or
you've got a central portal which is aggregating a lot of the performance stats in terms of the server side of things, the cloud side of things, but then you can integrate with App Insights as well. So obviously there's an additional cost for that. So if you're building a production environment, you might want to integrate with App Insights so that you've got more of that deep data, the deep analytics that App Insights gives you. So you can hook in your Power App, your Canvas Power App, and get that data fed straight through.
That's really interesting that App Insights is becoming the integration for analytics, because on one side of it, yes, you've got your performance, but there's also a way of getting ahead of identifying any issues. So App Insights is very good at flagging, because it's Azure based. You can set up alerts. If you get any errors, you can get those prompted, and you can be proactive rather than reactive, which is interesting.
And you can also very easily put your own kind of message into that. So we've been doing a bit with bots at the moment about putting what the common queries are, and then get that exported to Power BI. So you all kind of got that link there, and really useful.
I mean, if you've never used App Insights, it may be a dev tool, but it is so powerful for any application that you build to be able to actually really get into the detail and see all of the usage through the whole life cycle of that session for those users. So there's a lot of really, really powerful potential there.
I mean, that whole analytics piece is just, it covers so many different areas, from the operations side of it, the maintainability of that solution, but also back to where your enhancements are going to be as well. So you could use that from a product owner perspective to identify the behaviors of the people using your app, what they are using, what they're not using. How do you push that out from maybe an adoption perspective as well? Analytics really does touch a lot of areas, not just something's ran quickly or run slow. It's got a lot of uses.
It's got a lot of potential. I think
I've just scribbled a note, maybe one for a future show to cover App Insights and the kind of both sides of it. I think would be really interesting.
Yeah. So whizzing through some of the other things. So Teams integration. So the Power Apps Studio is essentially going to move into Teams so that you can build an app in the context of Teams. So they're introducing Teams templates, which essentially will be production ready templates, but then you'll be able to create those for your organization towards the end of this year. But it means that contextually you will understand what team you're in, what channel you're in, and be able to actually have control of that. And the reason for bringing the studio into it is that you will have a very similar UI for those Canvas apps that are actually developed specifically to sit in Teams. So
you'd be actually developing the Power App from within Teams itself,
within the context of Teams. So Power App Studio moving in, which is really, really interesting concept to see how that actually plays out. But I guess that rather than building an app and then actually surfacing it in Teams, if you're building it as a template and then it can just be added into whichever team you're using and contextually be aware of which team it's in, that offers so many potential solutions for just extending the way Teams is being used.
That'd be interesting, because for me that also then has a security boundary around that team, because it's based on the Office 365 group, which underpins the team itself. So from you could build an app and then not have to worry about who's got access to it, because it's just within the context of that team.
Yeah,
potentially.
Yeah, that's exactly what they were thinking. They were talking about scenarios like education, where you've got different students who have access to different things, but you're building one app that can be used in multiple locations. So
presumably it'd be like SharePoint, where you can change the permissions independently from it should you need to, but the kind of falling into the right bucket bit is you will create it in there and it's permission to that team.
permission to that team. I think that the nuance of the permissions in terms of access to other sources of data, and depending what kind of data sources you might be using, we'll have to see how that plays out. But obviously you can use, if you're using CDS, the teams can be used as the security part of the security model for the data in CDS to automatically filter the content. So it's I think there's big potential there for how that will be used. It will come out as templates spring, summer this year, and then we'll be able to create new templates in autumn this year.
Really interesting.
So yeah, and the final big announcement, and I guess there are so many things that we could be talking about, so I've tried to distill it down, is access to the common data service. So historically we've had access through Power BI, but it's been import the data using the REST APIs. We'll be able to use direct query to actually access common data service. Now what that means is that essentially the common data service is being wrapped up into an endpoint that we can just query. So the security trimming of content in it is being done based on the account that's being used. So that's already built in. So if I want to then build a Power BI report, rather than getting everything out and then having to filter it, I will have that filtering already done based on the security. It also means that it can be done, it's direct query. It can be refreshed all the time rather than having a scheduled refresh going on. But that same endpoint is going to be also exposed to T-SQL, which means that you can use SQL Server Management Studio to actually interrogate your common data service schema, and you will be seeing the entities as tables, and then you can write a T-SQL query to actually combine it and see that information. And
Store
again,
procedures.
That I don't know. So yeah, that's that I don't
triggers.
know.
Can we write some triggers? The good old days. And...
Stop swearing. Stop swearing.
Surely that'd be just flow, right? Oh, sorry, Power Automate. There's your trigger.
Absolutely. And I think that's the point, is you've already got all of those capabilities. You don't need to put triggers in. I mean, I don't know how so stored procedures, I don't know whether that will work. You'd probably need a SQL, you'd need somewhere to store them. And I'm not sure where that would happen. So there's still some questions around what you would do, because the store procedure, you would optimize things, and but I think it adds a lot of potential for being able to diagnose data issues if you've got Power BI reports, for being able to actually diagnose where you have data in there. And if you can just access something with a SQL query, your apps, you could be just pulling that data out rather than going through CDS and joining things together in different ways.
Show me all the values where you're missing a certain field.
Absolutely.
You've kind of changed your schema halfway through, and you need to find which ones haven't updated the latest one. Something.
If you
at some point,
if you were going to be building out, alerts around those things, that could be quite a difficult one to do if you've got compliance and you wanted to aggregate it together. So there, I think there's potential for viewing the data differently and bringing it together in ways that you wouldn't naturally do with a model-driven app and wouldn't be able to do with just CDS. So being able to aggregate that data together in different ways, I think that will offer massive potential for how we actually use CDS.
I know when you tweeted about this and you're like, oh my God, SQL against CDS, this is great. For me, it's really good to see a bit of maturity now starting to come out of the CDS, because before, I think it felt a bit black box. Data went in, you couldn't really see what was in there at scale very easily. You had different ways of doing it, but it was not an easy way of doing it. So you had people kind of looking at CDS and going, well, I've got SQL Server, I'm just going to use that because I've got all the tooling there to help me. But now it's interesting, they're reusing that same tooling to apply to the CDS, which, it makes you think differently about CDS previously than how you would have done previously, I think. So it's interesting that everything changes and you should reevaluate things. I think it's CDS is.
It is really interesting, and one of the challenges that we've always had as these historically server-based applications that have had SQL and server applications, as they've moved into software as a service, we've lost access to that underlying data storage and that underlying ability to say, right, well, I can query, my Dynamics database, my SharePoint database. Well, but Dynamics,
don't.
I had to swear a little bit in there. But yeah, it's for Dynamics, being able to actually put together the entities and actually pull that data out was something that you could do if it was on-prem, because you had a SQL database. It was part of what you had to do. But now, because you don't have access in the same way, this fills that gap, which is really looking forward to seeing that. Although that is in quotes coming soon.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite when? Who knows?
Just on CDS, because I know lots of people we speak to will come from the SharePoint world, and I know there's this ongoing fight between sort of Dynamics and CDS and SharePoint and what should be the background for Power Platform, things like that. I think you did a talk, was it last week, Al, on a kind of introduction to the CDS at the Black Country Power Platform user group run by Matt Weston, who was with us last week. Is that available?
So no, that wasn't recorded.
Wasn't recorded. Okay.
I am doing that again at the Nottingham or Notts Power Platform user group end of June.
Fantastic. So we'll get links to that if they're available and share them out. So yeah, if you're kind of new to CDS, heard about it a lot, interested in it, Al's got a great new talk that's a great intro to that. And I just want to pull back slightly to the team stuff, because one thing I think I heard was around responsive Power Apps by default. Because I was thinking with Teams, when it comes to mobile apps and having it fit there, are you going to go to the phone size template or the tablet size template? But I think now they're saying that the new templates can be responsive by default.
New templates will be responsive by default, and they will be accessible from Teams on a mobile device as well. So yes, they would. The responsive element, I think there's a lot coming in terms of the layouts. So the conversions of the model and the Canvas Power Apps and the ability to use the two of them together. The Teams templates, we'll see quite a lot of changes to the UI in terms of how it responds, how we build it, and how we can cross-purpose it for different applications that we're surfacing it in.
Be interesting to see how they make sure that stays easy, because implementing responsive stuff while Bootstrap's done a great job and various other templates, it can be a bit of a challenge kind of laying things out. So it'd be good to see how they make that easy for people as well.
And I think in the same way that they SharePoint is responsive out of the box, and they've got the rules put in. What they demonstrated very briefly was being able to say how do you scale this? How does this respond? Quite simply, is it going to be going to a vertical or does it go horizontal? How do you change it? So it looked very simple, but still using the same sort of building blocks in terms of laying it all out. And you've got to remember, model-driven apps are already responsive, so they've already got, I think, a lot of the ground rules in place across the products. So I'm expecting that it should be as good as the SharePoint pages are when you actually change the format and still have the flexibility of adding in your different things. The challenge there will be making sure that any components that are built, anything custom, is responsive and plays by the same rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that these responsive templates will only go so far. Once you start doing your own designs, that's another thing that people are going to have to think of, to say, hang on, yes, I've done my design, but how does it look in different environments, which will need to be catered for going forward. If you're able to put these apps in so many different places and you're able to get the context of where it is actually running, that's a bit more thought on the design side.
I think it's a lot more thought on the design side, and the Crisis Comms app that they released was responsive, so you could put it into a landscape format and it scaled out, and then you put it onto a mobile format and it scaled down. They did it really nicely, so it's not something that is impossible in the Power Platform. It's just
I think it's more how. Yeah, are they going to make it easy for people? That's going to be the interesting one, because for a lot of people, this is a new way of thinking that wouldn't be done with Power Apps. So we could see that. Thanks, Al. I just want to share that your blog's up, and we'll put it in the show notes where you talked about some of your thoughts and kind of some things you talked about today. That's in there, so do have a look at that in the show notes. And also Jack Binnell, another colleague of ours, threw down some of his thoughts, and he kind of mentioned governance and some slightly other different view of things. I noticed mixed reality was on there. Be interesting to certainly something I'm going to dig in after this. As I say, I've tried to keep away from looking at what's been on there, but be interesting to see that goes there.
There's a rabbit hole to go down. In 3D, hopefully.
Yeah, quite literally, you'll see me disappearing. No. So yeah, I would love to look at that mixed reality stuff, and I know from the hackathon. Was it John Levesque and the team? I know April Dunham, that's had a very good mixed reality entry that we'll put links to. It sounded very interesting, and see what they did with that. But I think enough Power Platform. Gary, tell us about the GitHub Satellite.
Yes, so whilst I was sat attending the MBAS sessions, on the same day at the same time, Github Satellite, the big conference for GitHub for the year, where they have some of the big announcements, was also happening. So I was sat in the keynote looking at the big things coming like to the platform soon as well. So there's 4 things really to highlight. So one of the announcements was something called GitHub Code Spaces. And GitHub Code Spaces is really, really interesting. What Code Spaces is basically a way of onboarding developers onto projects very quickly. So usually when you want to scale up a team, the first thing a developer has to do is install things on the machine, get all the dependencies, get set up, get the thing built and running.
Load everything into the GAC, all the good things.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, previously, wow, that's going back to some time.
Starting to swear again, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd say it's got better, but still painful.
Yeah. But that's an onboarding task for projects. The more developers you have, it's wasted time basically. So you really want to speed up that process. And what GitHub Code Spaces will allow you to do is simply go to a repository, and where you would previously now click to clone that repository and fork it, you will be able to create your own development environment automatically based on that repository. So what it will do is it will spin up a virtual machine in the background. It will open up a Visual Studio Code editor in the web, which is your version. It will pull down the source code. It will pull down all of the dependencies, and will give you an environment where you can just build and code. And you can code directly back into that GitHub repository or your own fork without having to leave the web browser. And because it comes with Visual Studio, it's got full support for extensions. It's got an integrated terminal in there. So effectively, it's like working on your own local machine.
But it's because I've seen there was Visual Studio Online, was it, which they used previously as a name and then kind of crawled back, and that was a similar thing where you could spin up VMs, but you'd be using VS Code in your desktop. This is entirely online.
So it's very interesting that you made the point about Visual Studio. So Visual Studio had something called Visual Studio Online, and that was in preview for a little while, and I got to play around with that, which was great. And it's very similar to Code Spaces. You can almost argue it's the same thing.
Yeah,
because it is. So,
but I think what seems to be different is that you can do it all online, so you don't even need to have Visual Studio Code. You're not putting anything locally at all. I think that's really nice.
So the Visual Studio Online, that was web-based as well. You could do that all in the browser. It's the same thing. Okay. The difference between the Visual Studio Code Spaces and the GitHub one is the GitHub Code Spaces is directly in the repository. So you don't have to say, here's my machine that I want to use and give it resources and point to a particular repository that you want to clone. It's all done within the...
It's more seamless.
Exactly, a lot more seamless, but they've added in extra features as well that what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to have your own personalized workspace settings. So everyone has their editor set up differently. Mine is totally different. I like to have my files bar on the right hand side, not the left. I like have to
always winds me up when you do that.
I know it winds people up, but I like it. But that's the way that I work. So what that's going to enable me to do is be able to go to any repository and use my own settings, which is going to be great for me, great for everyone else, because you don't want to break your flow. You don't want to have to go from one repository to the next and change the way that you work. You get into a rhythm working the way that you feel that you're most productive. So it's really interesting the way that that's going to work. If it's a web-based repository, so I don't know, it's let's say a
say
.NET
like
Core.
etiquette of Microsoft 365. People have been asking about how they can contribute in an easy way without having to download and start doing code stuff. Possibly with this.
Possibly, yeah. So one of the things that's really cool is that if it's a web-based project, then okay, you've just spun up a VM and it's running in the cloud somewhere. Okay, you can create a tunnel through to that machine. So if you're running on localhost, which you would do on your own machine, you just go to a browser and go localhost. Well, GitHub Codespaces will create a tunnel through to that localhost on that machine. That's so nice. That you can access that, and it will do it all seamlessly. Wow. So that is another.
I don't know about you. Al's pulling a face, and I'm pulling the same one, which is making me feel very old right now.
Absolutely,
it's very futuristic and amazing. So,
and I think so. One of the questions that I have. So obviously, everybody knows I'm not allowed to do code anymore. It's but if you are using Azure DevOps, so we talked about Visual Studio Online, which was you could do that as part of your organization. GitHub obviously slightly separated. Some organizations will be using it as their repository. The transition from Visual Studio Online to move into GitHub, how does that kind of play in with Azure DevOps, where you've kind of got your corporate repositories, and I can see hand gestures coming from Kevin over there, for those who aren't watching. But so how does that play out? Is there a general direction that we're moving towards using GitHub rather than using Azure DevOps, or what's the situation there?
So it all depends. It's like you've got two options. It's like with everything. It depends. Yes, I said it. But let's think about there are differences between GitHub. GitHub is becoming a lot. Previously, it was a very open platform. So you would go and you create your own repositories and everything would be open. And then they opened it up to be, well, actually, no, everyone can have private repositories now, so you can hide things away. And a lot of people would go, well, I need it to be private, therefore I'm going to go in DevOps.
Yep.
And that was one of the things in there. And what I see is they share a lot of similar features. From the DevOps side of things, the one thing you do have is it's all tied to your Azure instance. So regions, you can say, I want my Azure organization to be in the UK. So you've got a lot more options.
You can't
for
really
data
do that
sovereignty.
with GitHub, even with private repos. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think the default for GitHub is basically everything's in the US. That's where the GitHub servers are. But interestingly, that then takes us on to one of the next points that was announced about GitHub private instances. And a GitHub private instance is almost like have that Azure DevOps experience in GitHub. So you can bring your own encryption, you can have it region specific. But obviously this is aimed at enterprises who need that level of security and compliance. So there are things coming from GitHub that are going to be very similar to what Azure DevOps has. I think from what I see, I like working in GitHub. I really like that open source kind of nature of working in the open. It's not restrictive. It's quite flexible in the way that you want to work. It may be that if you need those processes and you're working in an organization that has a lot of defined processes in your software development lifecycle, DevOps will be more aligned to that because you've got all of the.
And I think where you've got that requirement tracking, the user stories, the piece like I know you can track kind of issues and tasks within GitHub, but it's not the same as a user story, and that more agile aligned I think certainly at the moment still fits Azure DevOps a little bit better.
And I guess what you've talked about with code spaces, that is the utopian dream. I can come in as a developer, I can get on board with a project really quickly and easily. All of the resources are there. We'll come on to references to books later, but that's obviously one of the key themes in the Unicorn project. So what I'm thinking is that capability likely to be moved into DevOps, because you talked about Visual Studio Online and GitHub, and it's kind of going from one side to the other side, and then so is there going to be the potential of using that internally within an organization?
So there's a potential for that to happen, and the reason why I say that is because you have GitHub code spaces, but you also have Visual Studio code spaces now, so just before that announcement, Visual Studio Online got renamed to Visual Studio Code Spaces, and the cost of running these code spaces dropped at the same time, so they reduced the price. Now, in the preview, it was
on the GitHub side. Is there any indication of cost on that, or
no? It's free.
It's going to be free.
If you have a public repository and even private repositories, it's going to be free.
Wow. So why would you pay for a visual? Okay, yeah, interesting.
So there's obviously different reasons. It may be that, again, Azure DevOps might be more tuned to the enterprise, but there is GitHub Enterprise as well, and there's obviously things working there in the background. But at the moment, Visual Studio Code Spaces, you can put in a GitHub repository link, and it will pull down the information from the files from that repository. However, there's no reason why they couldn't add a method to pull from your own Azure DevOps repositories as well.
Just to check, it's free at the moment because it's in early preview, which you can request to go on. Have they said it will continue to be free, or I'm wondering if this is one of those flows where they get you hooked onto it and then decide to start charging later in GitHub?
So in GitHub, as far as I'm aware, everything is going to be free. There's different licensing happening, so there's like GitHub for Teams, GitHub Enterprise, but you get so many other different features in there. As far as I'm aware, it's going to be made available. Let's say it might change, but interestingly, on the Visual Studio Code Spaces, because you create a VM, you actually say, here's the resources that I want to use. So it's run on Linux, it's got so much RAM, it's got so much processor. You actually pay for the consumption, because it creates a VM in your own dev tenant, in your Azure tenant, whereas Code Spaces is just somewhere in GitHub. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I guess the alignment of the naming is quite significant there. It sounds like it's quite significant.
Yes.
That, if they're using one for GitHub and they're using one for Visual Studio, then it's probably the same underlying tools and technology.
Oh, yes, definitely.
I think there's going to be a Yammer versus Teams debate, I think, with some of this stuff where there's massive overlaps in what they do, and there's some specific things, and there's probably some, well, I kind of like this and I've come from this background, where I like this and I come from this background. I don't think they will disappear, not for a good few years. Either way, well, DevOps won't disappear for a good few years, but I think there'll be
definitely that DevOps is definitely there to stay. I think from the point of it, going back to the it depends. So I like working in open source. I do stuff on GitHub with the CLI and PNP. Just imagine you go to a PNP library that has a load of SharePoint framework web parts in there, and you want to go and use that or spin it up and play around with it. You could just click a button on GitHub and it would just load everything for you, all the dependencies that you need. Therefore, you don't have to worry about what version of SharePoint framework you've got on your current machine.
What version of Node?
What version of Node you've got, because that code space,
that
code space will have all of those dependencies and it will enable you to do it. So it just takes away that potential frustration of onboarding, and it makes something like Samples Gallery even more appealing for people to use, because you can really get up and run up quickly with it. So
I'm aware we
spent quite a time.
We're getting a bit overexcited. Were there any other announcements?
So
less
big
exciting
one on security.
ones, hopefully.
Well, so it's probably not actually. So code scanning and secret scanning is now enabled for all repositories on GitHub. What that means is that GitHub will be scanning the code in your repository for any known vulnerabilities, and it will alert you of those vulnerabilities. Now, this isn't just your package is out of date and this one's been deprecated, please bump up the version. This is actually looking at how your code executes and identifying security flaws within the execution.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So the example that they gave was a node-based JavaScript front end with a MongoDB database, and there was code that was written that had this flaw, and you could go through and see the execution and then go, actually, we need to fix this because this is based on a flaw that's been, identified by a researcher, and it needs to go and be fixed. Otherwise,
so like SQL injection, that kind of
those
thing.
Kind of things. Yeah.
That must be very interesting because there's quite a few companies that play in that space, and that must be.
Yeah. So it uses something called CodeQL, which is like a third-party kind of organization. So that's what they're using as default. You can bring your own, like Kev, like you mentioned. Right. There's other providers out there that if you're already using that, you can bring that service in and tie that up. So you don't just have to use CodeQL. But that's a really interesting from a point of view of security. Some people go, "Oh, I don't trust this open source stuff." Well, actually, if
and rightly in many cases.
However, I would say I would probably trust code more that I can see than code I can't.
Yes. Yeah.
And with it being open, you've got people looking for these vulnerabilities, and if you've got an army of people looking for vulnerabilities and telling you you've got a vulnerability, you can do something about it.
Absolutely. So, and an army of people who can go in and make those changes, and then someone just clicks. Yep, great, thank you.
And let's face it, machine learning comes into play here massively, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All of the different syntaxes that you might be using and the combinations. If you design a model that's using something like this, it will be able to identify them. That's really interesting, actually, because that's kind of like the journey from on-prem being, it's more secure to online being even more secure.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, definitely. The second part of that with the scanning is also secret scanning. So secret scanning, I think, was already there for public repositories. So if, for example, you submit some code that had a client secret in there or a client ID, GitHub would go, hang on a second, you need to take that out because that's a vulnerability. They've enhanced that to that private repositories as well.
Which I've found great in the past, because not only is it your current code, but if you've checked in locally a secret and you sync that up to GitHub, then that previous version's in there. And they're often ones you forget. So that's been very useful. It seems I made a change to that because I got a couple of alerts around that a couple of days ago, which I need to go and look in for one of my repos. They seem to have extended it. And it looked like it may have gone into GitHub Actions as well. I haven't checked on the message there, but it seems to have gone broader as well. Whatever's
so GitHub Actions, there is a secrets. So like you would in DevOps pipelines, you can set up variables and you can encrypt usernames and passwords so they stay with the pipelines. GitHub Actions have got the same thing, and they're called secrets. But this is more secrets that are just in plain text. It's actually in the code base. Those secrets that are stored away are actually encrypted anyway.
I got an alert on a repo I know I was using GitHub Actions with, and I hadn't changed any of the code and got that alert. So I've got to go and check what it's telling me about.
Another task. The code scanning was really good. So I guess the last thing, because we'd already mentioned about private instances, is GitHub discussions was actually mentioned as well. This is something that we've actually been using in the Office 365 CLI because we managed to get onto the kind of like the private beta. So we've been able to use that and see where it's going to go. But it was nice to see it actually mentioned as such a high visible item and new feature that's coming, and that you're going to start to see more forum like conversations happening in GitHub repositories. So rather than conversations happening in issues lists, you've got a dedicated forum that you can go to, ask questions, and it's there to really start to build up community as well. We're using this in the CLI to promote our stats for the month. Any ideas that we're thinking about and will this, it's an idea, we want to put it out there and see if there's any interest. And if it's there, people can pick it up, they can ask questions about what we may want to do in the future. So it's a really interesting open space to have that discussion, whereas the issues list, it didn't really work that way. It's more of a
I think it's where things have been happening, but it's been painful. I think certainly if you look at the CLI one, you can see quite nicely there that the kind of distinguishment's not a word, is it? But the differences between the two shows up very nicely.
Yeah, and it really does help. And then we've got areas to refer back to. So we're quite happy to leave discussions open. Whereas issues, you don't want lots. You don't want an issue open for a long time, because if things get stale, if it's not getting picked up, does it have any real value? But actually, you think, well, was it the right thing to discuss in an issue as well? So we've actually been creating discussions from issues as well, which is quite good. So you can take the issues out. So we've had where you've got a closed issue that you've maybe answered a question. Well, that actually might be relevant to someone else. So let's move that to a discussion, and we can mark one of the comments as a particular answer. So then it becomes like a Q&A and a bit of a knowledge base as well. And as that builds up over time, it's just another repository where people can go and maybe get the answer that they need to the problem that they've got that someone else has had, without having to engage with anyone, because they might not be comfortable with doing that just yet. So
that's nice.
So yeah, it's really good to see. So yeah, hopefully we'll see that branching out into different repositories like M365 etiquette. That would be great to have discussions in there.
Yeah, that's great. I'll have a look at that. Thank you. No, lots going on at the moment, and we've obviously got builds coming up next week. I'm certainly planning to catch as many sessions as possible, so we might have possibly have either in the next show, or if we can manage to fit our time together to get a bonus show in between, we'll try that, but no promises, I think, on that one. Just want to wrap up tiny bit of other news. Big shout out to Simon Agton. We talked about the translated pages in the last show, SharePoint page translations, and we mentioned I bet someone goes and creates some way of translating pages using it, and yeah, that has actually taken place. Someone has created one. I'd love to say off the back of the show, but I'd be completely lying on there. So have a look at that. I'll put the link in the show notes. So make sure I get his name. Sorry, not Simon Agton, Robin Agton. So big shout out to him and say thank you for that one. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we've got a few events coming up. Comsverse, I know we've been shouting about this for a little while. It has moved to online. Sadly, with the pandemic, we're not able to join in person, so they've moved it fully online. It will be free to watch live. The exciting news about this one is not only is it each of us speaking there, but we are speaking as Grey Hat Beard, and we're actually going to be running an etiquette panel. So the etiquette of teams going to be joined by Moraine Summers, Carolina Ketikari, and Louise Fries. I hope I've pronounced your names right. Apologies. Have all agreed to come and join us. So we're going to be talking about the different etiquettes. When should you mention one person versus the whole team? Should you use private channels? How many channels are too many? You're going to be covering some of those in a kind of similar chat to the podcast here. So if you enjoy the podcast, sign up for that session and have a look. Al and I are also speaking. I'm talking about the Where on Earth bot, and I think Al, you're talking about tasks in Teams. Is that right?
I think Comsverse, I'm doing productivity actually.
Productivity. I do apologise.
Productivity. So kind of following on from some of the etiquette stuff.
Yeah. So nice links to all those would be great. We also have Global Con 2 coming up, another great conference from Collab 365. Excitingly, Jeff Teeper is now giving one of the keynotes for that. So he is speaking there. They've got some great names. I think Laurie Potmeyer as well. from Teams, Naomi Moneypenny and Chris McNulty talking about Cortex, which will be very exciting. So some big names coming through on that one, getting bigger and bigger. I know they're doing a big push to get to 20,000 users, so do look at that. And I think Al, you're
yep, so I'm doing task management for that one. Yeah.
Which will be fantastic. And I'm talking on running workshops in Teams remotely. So I've been doing a few of those recently, be sharing some of the tips and tricks on how I can do that. So join for that one. And then finally, we have the Microsoft 365 virtual marathon. I know we talked about kind of replacing the SharePoint conference that was due to go in, so hoping that we'll see some of the announcements that were due to come out in the conference. Some of those I'm sure will get announced there. I'm going to be speaking on the etiquette of meetings in Microsoft Teams, things to consider there. We also have a colleague, Sam Graber. He's talking about Microsoft Teams for the project manager, so showing the kind of things you can measure with chat, risks, issues, task documents, all the great things there. And I think that's probably his first time speaking, isn't it, Al? Or certainly first big conference. So yeah, do join and back him. He's always entertaining, so it should be a good session there. I think otherwise we'll wrap up on the news there, and we'll go into book club. So we'll go into Bookworm Node and start sharing our thoughts. So stick around and listen for part 2. Must go into user voice and get a stop recording button.